Somebody told me once that there were 200,000 people unemployed in those days. Now we've got upward of 3 million. And there was always work to be had in those days. But depending on your circumstances, even if you were ill, or you got children, which obviously Carol had, or the character of Cathy had, and I had an injury, couldn't work, I don't think there was a great deal of support in those days. I mean, there may have been support, but I think the trouble is that support is always something which is kind of hidden under the counter at the post office or something. You know, you look, you read these things. Now, of course, you do it all online, and you could probably find something. But I think in those days, it was very confusing, you know. When we were living, my wife and I were living in a £4 a week flat. And when I was out of work, I got £2 10 shillings a week on the dole, unemployment benefit. And I think that if we hadn't been able to scratch together other bits and pieces, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford the flat. I don't know. So it was tough, yeah, I'm sure it was tough. Yeah.
How did the film affect you as a person?
Well, it affected me in one way, in the fact that we were living in West London in a £4 a week flat. When we went out filming into the East End of London, I couldn't believe the way, the kind of circumstances that people were living in. One place we went to, which was a flat that we filmed in, was a four-sided block, Dickensian blocks, with a quadrangle in the middle, with the, they hung out the washing right across. And the flat we filmed in had 3 generations of their family in it. And in the corner of the kitchen, there was a toilet. I don't mean it was open, you had a little bit of privacy, but a bit of hardboard around it, and there was a toilet there. And this was a kitchen where they all lived. So I couldn't believe that. And when we filmed in Birmingham on that caravan site, that was very frightening. I mean, I couldn't believe that people were living in Birmingham in such straitened circumstances. No?
How did you, what impact did it have at the time? I can recall it at the time as being something quite shocking, but what impact do you think it had upon audiences?
Well, the audience, I mean, there was a massive public watch, a massive amount of public that watched it, about something like 12, 14 million. And then the BBC in their wisdom repeated it the following week. There were questions in the House, in Parliament, about, and it became the phrase, Cathy, questions about Cathy. And somebody shouted at me in the street about left my wife, and they believed it to be true. And I told a story in Derby. We were living in this £4 a week flat, and has anybody here heard of Max Bygraves? Mm-hmm. Well, the phone went. I've told you the story before. The phone went, and a voice said, Ray Brooks? I said, yes. He said, Max Bygraves here. I said, oh, come on. I said, I don't know Max Bygraves. You're kidding me, somebody's joking. He said, no, I am Max Bygraves. He said, I saw the show last night, Cathy. He said, I was so moved, I really was moved. I said, well, thank you very much, very much. He said, do you sing? And I said, yeah, a bit. Why? He said, I've written a little song. He said, I'll just sing it to you. He said, something goes like this. He said, Cathy, come home, Cathy, come home. I said, oh, yeah, yeah. He said, I'll tell you what, he said, I was very moved by that show. He said, we can make a fortune if you make a record. I mean, that's what it was like, you know, you either get attacked in the street or someone's trying to make money out of it. It was horrible, really. I mean, the projectionist here, I met him outside, and he said, did you know that it would have this effect? And I said, no, I don't think even Ken Loach, who directed it, realised that it would have this effect, the effect that it had. And now, because there are people here tonight watching it, it shows that its resonance is enormous. And I did say again in Derby on Sunday, I just don't know quite what the effect it has on people who see it for the first time. And never heard of it, but not seen it before. Do they think it's scratchy? Do they think it's shoddily shot? Or, I mean, what do people that have seen it the first time? Do you think that? Anybody who's seen it the first time? Do you think that? Do you think that? Have you seen it before?
I haven't seen it.
Now, what did you think?
I thought it was, the way it was sort of cut was a bit unusual for
Well, for now.
yeah. So, but it all hung together. I mean, the action was great.
Well, it does hang together. It has that sort of... I mean, it's one of those things that in filming, where if you have a close-up of one person and you're doing the scene with them, you never overlap the dialogue. So in other words, we can talk over each other like jazz, playing, instruments and all that. It works very well from that point of view. Again, as I said in Derby, I don't know whether all these voiceovers which come into it, people talking about statistics, that sort of thing, I'm not sure whether that is quite so clever as it was thought to be at the time. It should have been somehow involved within the dialogue. We should have dealt with those figures. I don't know how you can do that, but in theory it should have been better than having, there are 17,000 people on the dole at the moment, or 24,000 people, there's pregnancies of this, and they're living in homes, which is kind of voiceovers, like giving you instruction. It almost could be like captions, couldn't it? Those sort of things. So I'm not sure about that.
I think that's kind of the context of it all into, especially if you weren't there at the time, you didn't really know what the situation was. I mean, for me, it helped.
But it would help, yeah, of course, if you weren't there. I mean, I didn't know at the time that these things were going on. And of course, because most of it was improvised, you get a page of the script, and you go, Cathy and Reg walking in a park. Blank page. And Ken would say, look, I tell you what, you both walk out in that park. I want you to talk about trying to find a flat. But, just talk. That's all we did. Long before Mike Lee was ever born, we improvised everything. Ridiculous, really.
What influence do you think it has had as a form of docudrama upon current styles?
Oh, styles of shooting.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's happened. I think it's affected a lot of things. I think probably The Office was done like that, Ricky Gervais thing. I think that had a kind of, although it's funny, it had a similar kind of spontaneous things dashing around, A lot of them have done that, I'm sure. Yeah.
I think some people forget that it was 66, wasn't it? So
Yeah.
we're only talking 21 years after the war.
Yeah.
This month we've just been thinking 30 years after the Falklands. And there'll be people here who can remember the Falklands.
Mm.
I can remember being 9 years old in South London,
Mm.
calling over bomb sites.
Yes.
So 21 years after the war, we still hadn't rebuilt after that war.
No.
And that's what I think people forget. That's part of the reason why the situation was so dire there, was that because the economy hadn't coped with.
Well, we owed a lot more money to America.
Germany was good.
Mm.
About how Germany had managed to reconstruct.
Well, because we gave them money.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, quite.
Look, if you go back to the Middle Ages, to a feudal society, there wasn't a housing problem. Sure, people lived in mud and wattle huts, but there wasn't a shortage. There weren't some of them camping in the woods. It said, but in modern society, in other words, capitalist society, right from its beginnings, it has not been able to provide enough dwellings at the standards of the time in sufficient numbers. And here we are nearly 50 years later, and it's still true. So, it reminded me of that.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, no, don't pack up. That's true. Sorry.
On the other hand, there's 20% of properties with no one in Nottingham at the present time.
Yeah.
Well, who are they owned
People
by?
can't afford the rent.
Oh, people can't.
Well, no, there's 20% of the properties in Nottingham at the present time.
Well, apparently, if
Not
these are
fine.
owned by people, I'm not sure whether this is now true, you don't have to pay rates on the houses. If you own a house and it's empty, like Centre Point in London was built, this enormous block at the end of Charing Cross Road. Nobody was in it, and it was discovered that whoever built it didn't have to pay any rates on that building at all. There was no cost to the council at all for that building because it was unoccupied. So I think possibly that's still true now. That's why they're unoccupied. Because people can't afford the rents. I mean, I hate the way that shops are closing in the high street. And I mean, it's good that you get sort of charity shops taking over for a while. But shops can't survive because of the rents. I mean, it seems such a stupid idea to me to if you own a freehold of a shop in town, you want to rent it out. Why would you charge so much money that people can't afford to take it? It seems nuts to me. Very strange.
That's what gives it value, isn't it? Is that they want the value of the house, of the building. If they put their rents down, their capital value goes. So it's...
Yeah, but they're getting something in. Do you see what I mean? That's what I can't understand. I mean, as Cohen said when he started Tesco's, he said pile it high and sell it cheap. And that's really the logic of it. You know, if you've got it, get rid of it somehow. Not get the money in, some money.
But if you're an institution and have large amounts of property, then actually you look at the capital value or the capital asset value,
Yeah.
and that sits on your books. That's what you're more interested in because you know that's meeting another agenda. That's not got anything to do with your cash flow, and it's not got anything at all to do with providing accommodation for people. We seem to be far more interested in meeting the banker's requirements rather than the human requirements.
Yeah, well, I mean, therefore, a government should take some sort of side. I mean, good Lord, we all complain about governments. But I mean, I'd hate to be sitting in Downing Street trying to work out what to do. But at the same time, you think to yourself, couldn't they give some sort of tax relief to these companies that have got property on their books that gives them capital value or capital value of the company? And say, look, you do that, we'll ease your burden. I mean, then there'd be people complaining about that. I mean, I don't know what goes on. I mean, you never know what people want. In the film there, they were saying it was your fault.
Yeah.
You know, which I suppose is probably true. But at the same time, you don't want to push that onto people. You've got to give them some sort of worth.
Yes.
If you tell them it's your fault, it means your life is ruined.
Yeah.
I think the things that happened in Cathy do still happen, though. People still do lose their children because they're homeless.
Yeah.
People are still on the streets. They haven't all gone away.
That hasn't gone away, but I think the way they are listened to and supported is very, very different. Because you are damned if you do and you're damned if you don't in terms of social services, because to some extent they'll get criticised because they go too far to keep the family together on one hand.
I think if you go in housing aid any day of the week, you might find otherwise.
Yeah.
Did you think your character was naive or feckless?
Oh, yes.
Or
No, not feckless.
dreamer?
I think naive, yeah. That was the way we were. We were naive. As a lot of people that are, as somebody told me once, I'm ill-educated. A lot of people who are ill-educated they are naive. I mean, not so much now because they've all got laptops and they can find out things all the time. Google this up and Google that up. The fact is, in those days, I mean, you just listen to what people told you. You know, your parents, if you've got parents, your peers, they tell you something. Basically, I think we were naive, yeah, of course we were. I mean, it was, the one pleasure in life was actually sleeping with your wife, I should think, in those days. You know, and if children cropped up, well, that's a blessing. That's what they used to say. And it is.
Any further questions?
I thought that I saw the original TV play when it was on. I'm certainly old enough to remember that, and I think it's still got as much impact now as it had then. It's an absolutely magnificent performance from Carol White.
Oh, fantastic.
And from yourself as well, actually.
Well, I think I wouldn't say that, not just the au pair. I think...
but it remains one of the most heart-rending climaxes to a film I've ever seen, when the children are taken away. And another thing that stuck in my mind all these years for some reason is the expression on the face of the old fellow who's shunted off into homes to make space for other members of the family. That's stuck with me all these years since.
Yes, they're very kind of powerful images, aren't they? Certainly Carol at the end. I mean, it was just amazing. You think you're shooting that at 3 o'clock in the morning, and she's been sitting in a car trying to keep warm, and Sean and Stevie, her boys, are tired. plonk them on that bench. These people come in and take the children away, and she's screaming. I mean, it's amazing.
What was the shooting schedule for it? How long was the whole program?
I think we did it in 4.5 weeks.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but am I not right in thinking that the stir the film caused led to the setting up of the charity shelter?
No, Shelter was actually in its kind of
It was
embryonic state.
Yeah.
And they used, no, they didn't use it, it wasn't a cynical thing, but when Cathy Come Home came out, it gave them a lot more of a boost. And they had a higher profile. In fact, Carol and I were put on the board of Shelter for a while. You know, as if we knew anything about it, which is ridiculous. But that really we didn't, I thought it had started it, but I found out later that it hadn't. You know, Cathy did not start Shelter. Shelter was there in an embryonic state.
It does maintain your character went to work, yet, and it didn't imply he had bad habits such as gambling or drinking or anything like that, yet he couldn't afford the obviously low budget and low key housing that was on offer. Will that make any sense, really?
Well, you know, I mean, you're asking me a question now. I haven't seen it for such a long time. I don't remember ever having to unravel that particular issue. I mean, we were mostly concerned about coming up with lines to talk about, you know, things to talk about.
Of course.
You know, we didn't know anything about this. I mean, we did have a flat at the beginning. I don't know where we got that from either. You know, I think we were looking around it, or I don't know what happened. Maybe we got a few bob then, I don't know.
Did you?
I thought it was interesting when you were talking about the wages, how little Cathy earned in comparison to what you earned. I thought that was quite
Yes.
significant.
Oh yes, yes. Well, money was nothing. I mean, my mother in 1950 was a bus conductress in Brighton, and she was only £4 a week. And that's working early mornings, late nights. She worked during the war. And amazing. No money at all. My grandmother, on a Friday, living on a housing estate in Brighton, my grandmother, on a Monday, would pawn the bed sheets and my grandfather's suit. And when he got his wages on a Friday, she'd get his suit out and the bed sheets out, because he had to have his suit to go out on Saturday night and go to church on Sunday. And then he went back in the pawn shop on Monday. So, I mean, people were poor. They were certainly very poor. And I suppose, really, Carol and me in that film were kind of hangovers from what my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather were doing. And my mother was the same, you know, working hard. When my mother went to school and she had to be a fairy in a Christmas play, my grandmother took down the net curtains and sewed it around her. My grandfather, with his 7 Catholic family, 7 children, when the children's shoes wore out, the leather on the shoes, he would go down to the local dump and find old car tyres and peel off the rubber and tack it onto their shoes. I mean, we're talking about poverty, which actually doesn't quite exist today. I don't think that does. They really struggle. Very, very hard work. Bubble and squeak. There's a lot of bubble and squeak. You know what that is, it? Good. Tripe and onions.
Did you'd done the film of Mac before then, obviously,
Yeah.
with Michael Crawford. Did you get any big screen or television offers after the Cathy Come Home, or did you go back into the theatre?
No, I couldn't. I mean, we won the Cannes Film Festival, and we were taken out there, my wife and I, and we stayed in this fantastic hotel in Cannes on the seafront, the private beach. Said to pay for everything we wanted. We were living in a £4 a week flat in those days. And a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label whiskey in the room, and flowers, and signed for everything, champagne, and all this stuff was going on. Anyway, won, and I came back to London. The first job I got was Dixon O'Clock Green, which no actor wanted to do, but I did. You don't do anything. We're tarts, you don't do any of it.
When the play came out, did anyone challenge what was in it, in the sense of saying
A politician or anything?
this is an unfair representation of...
No, I didn't. Well, I don't know
Was there
about
ever
that.
any opposition to it?
Well, I think there was opposition within the BBC of making it. I know Ken had to work very hard, and that was the one. It was certainly, just as a little corollary to that, never before had a play been done for television that was 90% on film, 10% in the studio. Normally it was 10% on film and 90% in the studio. So that was a breakthrough. Ken would know, and Ken's not here now, but if Ken was here, he would probably give you chapter and verse about what people had said about the thing and saying it wasn't a good representation. I'm sure he would, because he's a very political man, Ken. Very left-wing. He knows all about everything. Very bright man. Looks like Harry Potter, really. He hasn't got any older.
How did you get into acting?
Huh? Oh, acting.
How did you get into acting?
Acting, well, acting. My mother, when I was 7, took me to elocution lessons. Because in those days it was thought that if you could speak well, you'd get a good job and you'd have a secure future. And I did a Brighton Hove Music Festival. They did poems and music and things like. I had a poem. I do remember the title of it. It was called "Bob Has Blown 100 Eggs," as I wanted to say. But the poem goes on after that. And my elocution teacher said, he looks a bit nervous. I think he should do some drama. So I went into amateur dramatics. And I met a girl there I loved. And her parents were a bit middle class. Because my mother was a bus conductress and I was illegitimate and all that. And her parents wanted to go to RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. And I thought, God, you know, fantastic, you know, acting, how fantastic. And I did go to meet her once at RADA. I was working in an office and I got 2 tickets to see Johnny Ray at the, in London. And she loved Johnny Ray. He was a pop singer, an American pop singer. And I stood outside in Gower Street. I stood outside this RADA. The windows were open in summer. And I saw all these blokes walking around with books on their heads. And she used to tell me how wonderful they were. And I said, well, anyone could walk around with a book on their head. I mean, what's that? She said, that's deportment. You know, you can't act, you're not an actor. These are real actors. So I thought I'd try and be an actor. And my aunt knew a juggler in Red Hill. And I met him. And he gave me a list of agents. And I wrote off to them. That's how I started. Quite simple, really. Anyone can do it. It's true.
Did you have a musical career?
I learned the piano. I auditioned for The Sound of Music when he came over, because I'd done a television play that Adam Faith was written for him, and he turned it down because he thought it was going to sully his reputation. So they dyed my hair blonde and stuck me in front of the John Barry 7 with the backing group for Adam Faith, and I did it live on television. And then I had a call, would I go and audition The Sound of Music, which is a big show in America. It was coming to London for the first time. And there were 200 people auditioning for the Post Boy. You only have one song. You are 16, going on 17, baby, is nothing. There's 2 very high notes now, which I could never reach. And they taught me, with a pianist, to try and sing these. I mean, Ema Sumac couldn't really sing them, terribly hard. And it, you know, anyway. And I got through, and I got right, I beat Frank Ifield on the way. When I got to the last 2, it was me and a guy called Peter Bennett. And it was the theatre in the West End. And Rodgers and Hammerstein were coming over to sit in the audience to choose this boy with the one song. Blonde, German boy, that's why I died here, see? Very kind of imaginative ale. And he went on first, Peter. And I hid in the back of the theatre. And I didn't hear what he was doing, nothing. And suddenly he appeared, Peter thing, Bennett. And he said, they won't sing you now, Ray. I said, all right, okay. He said, but you won't get it, I've got it. And I walked out there, felt terrible, walked out the stage. And they said, terribly sorry, Ray, you know, the song. And I said, okay. And I remember walking out that stage door, the Palace Theatre, get on the number 60 bus, to go back to Kilburn where we were living. And I thought, that's it, I'm finished. There was a chance of being in a play for a year, earning £60 a week, in a musical, £60 a week was hard. And I thought it was over. Well, I'm sure we've all got stories like that, but it's not like that, but you know, being let down or failing. But it's horrible when it happens to you when you're very young. It was really horrible. Anyway, that's my acting career in a nutshell.
My wife was convinced that you had a group at some time, but maybe this was when you were in front of
John Barry.
John Barry 7.
I was in a film with Billy Fury. I was in his group. was Michael Winner's second film. I played the double bass in that. I did actually make a record. I wrote songs when we were very broke. And I did actually make an album of my songs, which I sang. And funnily enough, the broker producing was a man called Ray Cameron. And my dear friend Barry Cryer. Well, I must tell you about Barry Cryer. Have you heard of Barry Cryer?
Yeah.
Well, I was at a thing in Brighton, and Barry was talking to somebody, and he said, oh, he was coming on. And somebody asked him from the audience, they said, what is your favourite memory of Humphrey Lyttelton? You know, sorry, I haven't a clue. And he said, well, he said, lots of memories. He said, but there was a wonderful warm-up line he used to do before they were recording the show. And he'd say to the audience, I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, there's a wonderful supermarket around the corner. They've got the most fantastic sausages there. He said, there's a picture on the front of Anthony Worrell Thompson, and written underneath is prick with a fork. That's Barry Cryer. Barry Cryer, when he was doing the Kenny Everett show, he wrote it. And Ray Cameron was his co-writer. And he's the father of Michael McIntyre, who's a very big comic. And Ray Cameron also produced Grandad for Clive Dunn, a big hit record. So that's why I did my record. So that's the only recordings I've done, or groups I've ever been in. So,
obviously the play's brilliant, but it's also very harrowing, and it ends in with Cathy and Reg in quite a grim state. But did you ever envisage Cathy and Reg having some sort of future, or overcoming the barriers?
It was very strange. The BBC, in their wisdom, about 4 years ago, advertised they were going to do a remake of Cathy Come Home, a modern version.
Mm-hmm.
And I got quite excited about that because I thought, that's what it was like. You know, you either get attacked in the street or someone's trying to make money out of it. It was horrible, really. I mean, the projectionist here, I met him outside, and he said, did you know that it would have this effect? And I said, no, I don't think even Ken Loach, who directed it, realised that it would have this effect. The effect that it had. And now, because there are people here tonight watching it, it shows that its resonance is enormous. And I did say again in Derby on Sunday, I just don't know quite what the effect it has on people who see it for the first time. And never heard of it, but not seen it before. Do they think it's scratchy? Do they think it's shoddily shot? Or, I mean, what do people do? There was a toilet. I don't mean it was open. You had a little bit of privacy, but a bit of hardboard around it, and there was a toilet there. And this was a kitchen where they all lived. So I couldn't believe that. And when we filmed in Birmingham on that caravan site, that was very frightening. I mean, I couldn't believe that people were living in Birmingham in such straitened circumstances. No,
How did you, what impact did it have at the time? I can recall it at the time as being something quite shocking, but what impact do you think it had upon audiences?
Well, I mean, there was a massive public watched, a massive amount of public that watched it, about something like 12, 14 million. And then the BBC, in their wisdom, repeated it the following week. There were questions in the House, in Parliament, about, and it became the phrase, Cathy. Somebody told me once that there were 200,000 people unemployed in those days. Now we've got upward of 3 million. And there was always work to be had in those days. But depending on your circumstances, even if you were ill, or you got children, which obviously Carol had, or the character of Cathy had, and I had an injury and couldn't work, I don't think there was a great deal of support in those days. I mean, there may have been support, but I think the trouble is that support is always something which is kind of hidden under the counter at the post office or something. You know, you read these things. Now, of course, you do it all online, and you could probably find something. But I think in those days, it was very confusing, you know. When we were living, my wife and I were living in a £4 a week flat. And when I was out of work, I got £2 10 shillings a week on the dole, unemployment benefit. And I think that if we hadn't been able to scratch together other bits and pieces, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford the flat. I don't know. So it was tough, yeah, I'm sure it was tough. Yeah.
How did the film affect you as a person?
Well, it affected me in one way, in the fact that we were living in West London in a £4 a week flat. When we went out filming into the East End of London, I couldn't believe the kind of circumstances that people were living in. One place we went to, which was a flat that we filmed in, was a four-sided block, Dickensian blocks, with a quadrangle in the middle, with they hung out the washing right across. And the flat we filmed in had 3 generations of their family in it. And in the corner of the kitchen, questions about Cathy. And somebody shouted at me in the street about left my wife, and they believed it to be true. And I told a story in Derby. We were living in this £4 a week flat, and has anybody here heard of Max Bygraves? Well, the phone went. I told you the story before. The phone went, and a voice said, Ray Brooks? I said, yes. He said, Max Bygraves here. I said, oh, come on. I said, I don't know Max Bygraves. You're kidding me, somebody's joking. He said, no, I am Max Bygraves. He said, I saw the show last night, Cathy. He said, I was so moved, I really was moved. I said, well, thank you very much, very much. He said, do you sing? And I said, yeah, a bit. Why? He said, I've written a little song. He said, I'll just sing it to you. He said, so it goes like this. He said, Cathy, come home. Cathy, come home. I said, oh, yeah, yeah. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, I was very moved by that show. He said, we can make a fortune if you rig a record.